The relationship between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it is an added complication to ongoing peace talks. Yesterday on Fox News, Vice President J.D. Vance admitted that nations deviate on some of their interests.
The Israelis and the United States, we have a lot of shared interests, but we also have some situations where our interests diverge. And I think where the president has been very clear here is that while Israel obviously has some objectives that it has, the United States' main objective in Iran is to ensure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, joins us now to discuss this. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador, and welcome. First, I want to get your reaction to the vice president's comments.
Good morning, Errol. I think the vice president is stating the obvious. Yeah, the United States and Israel sometimes have a confluence of interests, and sometimes those interests do diverge. The United States is a superpower. It's situated very far from the Middle East. It's not threatened with immediate national destruction by Iran. And Israel's a small country in Iran's backyard, which is threatened existentially by Iran and its proxies. So the interest can always dovetail. At the beginning of the operation over 100 days ago, there were 5 objectives set out by both countries, of which the ending Iran's nuclear ambitions was only one. They've included ending the support for terror, and stopping its ballistic missile system that threatens not just Israel, but the entire Middle East. Those objectives have been pushed aside by the administration. They're focusing almost exclusively on the nuclear issue. And that is going to be a challenge for the state of Israel, certainly, because we're going to continue to face those proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels who fired a rocket at Tel Aviv just yesterday. So Israel's going to say, most likely, if the United States reaches an agreement with Iran, that agreement cannot tie Israel's hands, and Israel's going to have to continue to do what it needs to do to defend itself.
The Israeli Prime Minister met with President Trump before this war began, and there are reports that he effectively sold the U.S. on joining Israel in this effort. But more recently, we've got these reports of expletive-filled phone calls between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's unusual for that news to actually get out if it is accurate. Why do you think that leaked? Might this be, for show, considering the two have been so close for years? Are they really on the outs?
Yeah, no one's going to know. And certainly when things get leaked to the press, someone has an interest in leaking them. And we can't begin to understand that. What we do know is that for many weeks before this war began, there were similar reports of significant differences between Netanyahu and President Trump. And that turned out to be type of a camouflage for very close cooperation between the two in the planning of this war. So we do not know. I think that with all that, I think the president is very serious about trying to reach an agreement with Iran. The nature of that agreement has been set out pretty forthrightly by the president. It focuses mainly on opening the Strait of Hormuz to shipping, to oil shipping, and to getting some type of Iranian commitment to end its nuclear program, and certainly to curtail that program. Israel is going to be very concerned for those reasons that I mentioned earlier. It doesn't address the question of Iranian support for terror or those ballistic missiles, but also we're going to ask ourselves in Israel, what's going to be the price? Is the United States going to pay Iran for these concessions by releasing frozen assets or even lifting sanctions, which would be an economic lifeline to this regime, which has been so seriously impaired economically by the war? And that's going to be a major issue of concern / contention between the two leaderships.
Ambassador Michael Oren, great to have your insight this Tuesday. Thanks for being with us.